I never imagined grief could be weaponized against me. 1 week after burying the only man I ever loved, I walked into my living room to find my 3 children sitting in a perfect row, like vultures waiting for a carcass to stop twitching. They smiled, wide and rehearsed, and slid a thick packet toward me. A life agreement, they called it. A document that would strip me of every right, every asset, every ounce of independence in exchange for their support. They believed I was weak, broken, alone. They believed their father left me penniless. They believed I would sign anything just to keep a family. What they didn't know was that I still owned a 630-acre ranch, held $3 million in trust, and had spent years preparing for the day their greed would finally reveal itself. And as their pens hovered over the signature line, waiting for mine, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a declaration of war, and they had no idea what I was about to unleash. My name is Eleanor Whitlow. I am 59 years old, and the day I buried my husband felt like the world had folded in on itself. But even as grief suffocated me, my children stood around in stiff suits, their expressions too composed, too watchful. I caught glimpses of exchanged looks, the kind that carried secrets, not sorrow. They hovered close, offering help that felt rehearsed rather than heartfelt, guiding guests away so they could whisper in corners. And as the last handful of mourners left, an unsettling certainty settled in my chest. Whatever was coming next wouldn't be about love, comfort, or family. It would be about control. And I was suddenly very aware that I might be standing alone in this fight. As the funeral home staff cleared the last bouquets, I stepped outside for air, only to hear my eldest daughter, Marissa, hissing, "We need to handle the estate before she makes any decisions." My heart dropped. They weren't mourning, they were planning. Shane argued they should wait a few days, but Troy snapped that opportunities expire. Their silhouettes standing among flowers meant to honor their father suddenly looked like strangers. I pressed my back against the wall, my breath trembling as I realized they were circling not out of love, but expectation, waiting to claim something that wasn't even offered. And in that moment, grief twisted into a cold awareness. My children weren't comforting me, they were positioning themselves. Back at home, Marissa insisted on helping me sort through things, but I watched her eyes scan the living room like a real estate agent assessing value. Her fingers lingered on my husband's antique desk, on paintings he'd collected over decades. She wasn't remembering him, she was mentally cataloging. When she caught me watching, flashed a too bright smile and said, "Just thinking about what should be preserved." But her tone betrayed her. Every item she touched with ownership, not curiosity. My stomach tightened as I realized she wasn't waiting for me to heal, she was waiting for me to let go of the house, of the decisions, and apparently of my rights. Something dark was unfolding, and she wasn't hiding it well. That night, after the last dish was washed, the 3 of them surrounded me in the living room. Marissa crossed her legs elegantly, Shane sat forward, and Troy leaned back like a king waiting to be obeyed. They gently suggested I should move in with one of them for stability. They spoke as if I were fragile glass ready to shatter, but underneath their soft tones, I sensed strategy. They wanted access, full access, my home, my accounts, my decisions. When I declined, Troy exchanged a tense look with Marissa, and Shane muttered, "This will be harder than we thought." A chill rippled through me. They weren't helping me, they were corralling me. The following morning, my children arrived earlier than usual, carrying breakfast and overly bright attitudes. They hovered as I ate, asking vague questions about my finances, insurance, and the house. Their voices sounded sweet, but their eyes remained sharp. Every time I hesitated, Troy's jaw tightened, and Marissa leaned in with false sympathy. The pretense of affection had cracked, leaving behind an uncomfortable pressure, like they were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As they exchanged silent signals, I finally recognized the truth. This wasn't concern or family unity, it was a coordinated effort. They wanted something big, and they believed. They had me softened by grief enough to take it. Later that afternoon, I walked into the dining room and froze. A thick, official-looking folder sat neatly on the table, placed like a gift or a warning. Across the front, in bold letters, were the words, "Life Agreement." My heart pounded as I opened it. Pages upon pages of legal jargon, highlighted sections, signature lines. This wasn't casual. This wasn't spontaneous. This had been prepared. As I read the first page, my hands shook. It wasn't a support plan, it was a takeover. My assets, my decisions, my independence, all placed under my children's collective care. I hadn't even asked for help, yet they were already drafting my surrender. Something in me hardened. That evening, they gathered around me again, but this time their smiles were unmistakably predatory. Marissa slid the folder toward me and said, "Mom, it's time." Troy added, "It's simple. Sign it or you won't be part of this family anymore." Shane, quieter but equally complicit, nodded in agreement. For a moment, grief threatened to choke me, but beneath it, a different fire began to burn. They truly believed I was powerless, penniless, dependent, desperate. They believed this was a checkmate. I looked at their smug faces and realized they had no idea what I still controlled. And as I closed the folder and met their eyes, the battle lines were officially drawn. Eleanor sat at the table with the thick folder spread open before her, each page more suffocating than the last. The more she read, the clearer the horror became. The agreement demanded she surrender every financial decision to her children, from her bank accounts to property rights, even medical authority. It wasn't protection, it was domination dressed in legal language. The document assumed she was incapable, fragile, incompetent. As she scanned the clauses, she noticed they had already prepared a timeline for transitioning her assets. Her hands trembled, not with weakness, but anger. They believed she would sign because they believed she had nothing left, and in their arrogance, they forgot one truth. Eleanor Whitlow was not a woman who surrendered easily. When Eleanor closed the folder, her children immediately rushed in with syrupy voices. Marissa stroked her shoulder, insisting the papers were just a formality after Dad's death. Shane chimed in that it was only meant to keep things organized, but their eyes flickered with impatience, betraying the facade. Troy, leaning against the wall with arms crossed, muttered that it was the smart thing to do. Their pitying smiles suffocated her. She felt like a lamb being coaxed toward a pen already locked from the inside. The more they reassured, the more she recognized the manipulation. Their concern wasn't love, it was strategy. They wanted control, and they wanted it now, and they were counting on her grief to blind her. As her children continued pushing the agreement, Eleanor's mind slipped back through the years, moments she had dismissed but now saw with painful clarity. Marissa demanded expensive things as a teenager and sulked when she didn't get them. Troy refuses to work summers because Mom and Dad will handle it. Shane relied on his parents for rent well into adulthood, always claiming he was almost stable. Each memory clicked into place like puzzle pieces, forming an undeniable truth. Their entitlement wasn't new. It had been growing quietly, fed by Eleanor's kindness and their father's patience. She had mistaken dependence for love, laziness for vulnerability. Now, standing before her in tailored clothing and rehearsed expressions, they were the adults those early behaviors had shaped, greedy, entitled, and desperate for control. Trying to hold on to some semblance of reason, Eleanor asked a simple question. Why does this agreement require giving you full control over everything? Marissa's expression snapped instantly, the sugary mask evaporating. "Don't start imagining things," she hissed. "You're paranoid because you're grieving." Shane looked away, guilty. Troy rolled his eyes dramatically. Their irritation grew the more Eleanor questioned, as if her desire for clarity was an inconvenience. For the first time, Eleanor saw the truth unfiltered. Marissa wasn't worried about her mother's well-being. She was irritated that her plan wasn't going smoothly. The daughter she raised with tenderness was now a woman who dismissed her as a burden. And in that moment, Eleanor understood. To them, she wasn't a mother. She was an obstacle. Just when Eleanor thought the conversation couldn't get worse, Troy stepped forward with a smirk. His tone was casual, almost bored when he said, "If you don't sign, Mom, we'll have to consider alternatives, maybe a retirement home, somewhere supervised." Eleanor's breath caught. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a threat, the kind that came from someone who assumed he held all the power. Marissa didn't object. Shane looked away again, ashamed but silent. They had cornered her emotionally, financially, and now physically. They believed they had frightened her into compliance. Instead, their cruelty lit a spark deep inside her, a dangerous one. If they wanted a fight, they had just declared it formally. Later that evening, as Eleanor moved quietly through the hallway, she overheard them again, this time without pretense. Marissa was dividing household items aloud, her voice crisp and businesslike. Troy was calculating what he could liquidate quickly. Shane was asking if they should list the house immediately, or wait until she settled somewhere. They were speaking as if she had already vanished, as if she no longer lived in the home built with love and decades of sacrifice. Eleanor stood frozen, each word carving deeper into her chest. They weren't waiting for her to sign, they were planning for when she was gone. That was the moment she stopped feeling hurt and started feeling strategic. Eleanor returned to the dining table, the life agreement still lying open, and stared at it long and hard. She could expose their greed now, but that would play into their hands. They expected resistance. They expected outrage. What they didn't expect was silence, submission, strategy. Eleanor made a choice. She would play along, appear confused, allow them to believe their plan was working, because people blinded by greed always reveal more when they think they've won. She closed the folder gently, her expression calm, her heart steady. She would let them think they held the upper hand. Meanwhile, she would prepare the truth they were not ready for. The war had begun, and she would win it quietly. Eleanor left before sunrise, her car rolling down the quiet highway toward land her children didn't even know she owned. As the city thinned into open fields, her heartbeat steadied. The 630-acre ranch rose like a sanctuary, vast, untouched, powerful. She stepped out of the car and inhaled deeply, the air cleaner than anything she'd breathed in weeks. This land wasn't inherited by accident. It was part of a plan she and her husband built years ago, anticipating the day their children's entitlement might turn into aggression. Walking along the fence line, she felt ownership, strength, and clarity return to her bones. Here, she wasn't the grieving widow they underestimated. Here, she was the woman with leverage they never imagined existed. Inside the ranch office, Eleanor was greeted by Samuel Tate, the manager who had been with her family for decades. His relief at seeing her alive and standing firm was palpable. They sat across from each other as she explained what her children had done, and his expression darkened with loyal protectiveness. Eleanor requested updated records, deed confirmations, and property rights documentation. Samuel laid everything out carefully, every acre, every contract, every legal document still in her name alone. Not a single signature had been transferred, altered, or requested. Her children truly had no idea this entire empire existed. Samuel assured her he would safeguard the ranch with absolute secrecy. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt the ground beneath her feet solidify. After leaving the office, Eleanor drove to a secluded storage building on the back edge of the property. Inside was a metal safe her husband had installed nearly 15 years ago, secured with a passcode only the two of them shared. Her hands hovered over the keypad, trembling not from fear but anticipation. When the door swung open, its contents glimmered faintly in the dim light. Trust documents, untouched account statements, and proof of a $3 million fund still under her exclusive control. Her children had assumed she was financially fragile, but this safe held the truth. They were the ones standing on nothing. As she sifted through the papers, Eleanor felt a cold, steady confidence rise. She finally had everything she needed to strike back. Eleanor contacted her husband's old lawyer, Mr. Kessler, a quiet man but razor-sharp beneath his gentle demeanor. When she walked into his office, he listened without interruption as she described the life agreement her children had attempted to force on her. His expression hardened as he reached into a locked drawer and pulled out a file she had never seen before. Inside was a clause her husband had added years ago, one that prevented any family member from claiming authority over her finances without a court ruling proving incompetence. It meant their entire plan was legally impossible. Mr. Kessler assured her he would support whatever action she chose next. Eleanor left the office feeling as though her husband had reached out from beyond the grave to protect her. Returning to the ranch, Eleanor spread her documents across a long wooden table, the sunlight illuminating each page like evidence in a courtroom. She began drafting a counter-agreement, one designed not only to block her children's scheme, but to expose their intentions. Her version included clauses that required mutual accountability, transparency, and joint decision-making with recorded oversight. It looked harmless on the surface, but signing it would trap them into admitting their manipulative intent. She wrote every line with precision, imagining their faces when they realized they'd walked into their own downfall. This wasn't merely a response, it was a reversal. She wouldn't just defend herself, she would make sure they faced the consequences of their greed. Before returning home, Eleanor stopped at a small diner to check her email. When she opened her account, a notification struck her like ice. 3 failed login attempts from an unknown device. She checked the security logs and saw the name, Troy's laptop. Her own son had tried hacking into her personal accounts. Not to help her, not to protect her, but to seize control before she could act. The betrayal stung deeply, but it also confirmed everything she already suspected. Her children were desperate. Reckless, and desperation made people sloppy. She saved screenshots, forwarded logs to her lawyer, and drafted a quiet, dangerous promise to herself. If they wanted war, they were about to receive one in full. As Eleanor prepared to leave the ranch, she gathered her documents, her counter-agreement, and the new legal ammunition her husband's clause provided. She crafted her plan carefully. She would return home appearing overwhelmed, frightened, and ready to sign whatever they put in front of her. She would give them just enough confidence to drop their guard entirely. The trap had to feel soft, gentle, like a mother's surrender. But beneath that softness lay steel. She rehearsed her tone, her expression, the slight tremble in her hands. When she looked in the mirror, she saw not a broken widow, but a strategist. Her children had no idea that the woman driving home wasn't the one they expected. She was the one they should fear. When Eleanor walked back into her home, she deliberately let her shoulders sag, her voice softened, and her movements slow. She allowed her hands to tremble when she spoke, pretending the pressure had finally crushed her. Her children exchanged triumphant glances, believing she was on the verge of surrender. Marissa even patted her hand gently, masking her glee with forced sympathy. Shane whispered that she was doing the right thing, while Troy smirked openly. Eleanor lowered her eyes to sell the performance, hiding the fire behind them. Every second of her act tightened the web she had spun. They thought she had broken. Thought victory was in reach. They had no idea she had returned not to submit, but to strike. Her children wasted no time. Within hours, they set up what they dramatically called a signing ceremony. They arranged chairs, printed fresh copies of the life agreement, and even lit candles as if the moment were sacred. Marissa rehearsed lines about unity while Shane prepared to film the event for documentation. Troy paced confidently, ready to claim control as soon as the pen touched paper. Eleanor sat quietly, watching them behave like CEOs preparing for a merger, not children supporting their mother. Their arrogance filled the room like poison. They were so certain she was beaten that they didn't sense the storm building behind her calm smile. They were preparing a celebration, completely unaware it would become their undoing. Minutes before the ceremony began, the front door opened, and Eleanor's lawyer, Mr. Kessler, stepped inside carrying a briefcase. The children froze mid-smile. Marissa's face blanched. Shane nearly dropped his phone. Troy's eyes narrowed into rage. Eleanor calmly introduced him as her personal witness to the signing, watching their confidence crack like thin ice beneath heavy boots. Mr. Kessler placed his briefcase on the table with deliberate precision, his presence shifting the atmosphere instantly. The children's rehearsed charm vanished, replaced with tension and barely concealed panic. They had expected a vulnerable mother signing in isolation, not a woman protected, prepared, and represented. For the first time, they realized this moment might not belong to them after all. When Marissa slid the agreement toward Eleanor, expecting her trembling signature, Eleanor simply smiled and reached into her bag. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and played the audio recording. Troy threatening a retirement home, Marissa mocking her intelligence, Shane discussing dividing assets before she was out of the way. Their voices spilled through the speakers with cruel clarity, their faces drained of color. Mr. Kessler watched silently, his expression unreadable. Eleanor lifted her chin and said, "This is what you wanted me to sign under." The room filled with a suffocating silence, heavy, humiliating, inescapable. For once, they had no excuses, no manipulation, no smile to hide behind. The truth was undeniable, and the trap had snapped shut. Before the children could recover, Mr. Kessler opened his briefcase and revealed documents they had never seen. Ownership deeds to the 630-acre ranch, trust statements showing $3 million under Eleanor's exclusive control, and legal protections her husband had written years prior. Marissa's jaw fell open. Shane whispered, "This isn't possible." Troy stepped back as if struck. The empire they assumed didn't exist suddenly stood in front of them, undeniable and unreachable. Eleanor watched their shock with quiet satisfaction. They had built their entire scheme on the belief that she was powerless and broke. Now the truth towered over them. She had more wealth and protection than they ever imagined, and none of it included them. After letting the silence simmer, Eleanor slid her agreement across the table. It was simple, elegant, and devastating. It stated that any attempt to pressure, manipulate, threaten, or coerce her again would result in immediate legal disinheritance, permanent and irrevocable. To avoid consequences, they would be required to sign that they had acted improperly and would cease all interference. Marissa sputtered in disbelief. Shane looked sick, and Troy clenched his fists. The document that was supposed to control her had transformed into a weapon aimed at them. Eleanor met their shocked eyes, her voice steady as she said, "This is the only agreement being signed tonight." They were trapped by their own greed and her brilliant restraint. As the reality settled, the siblings began turning on each other like cornered animals. Marissa accused Troy of pushing too hard. Troy blamed Shane for being too soft. Shane snapped that they had all gone too far. Their unity shattered instantly, revealing the selfishness beneath the surface. Eleanor stood silently, watching them unravel, yelling, pacing, pointing fingers. They had entered the room as a united front of entitlement and left as divided fragments of ambition. Their downfall wasn't dramatic, it was pathetic, and in their chaos, Eleanor felt the final shift of power snap into place. They were no longer her oppressors, they were victims of their own greed, and she had finally taken back everything they tried to steal. Before I tell you what happened next, take a second to subscribe, because the next twist hit harder than anything I ever expected. Eleanor didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't tremble. She simply placed the folder on the dining table and informed her children that all financial access, every card, every allowance, every trust supplement was officially terminated. The room froze. Marissa's jaw dropped, Troy's face twisted in disbelief, and Shane looked as if someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Eleanor watched them realize something they had never considered. Their entitlement had an expiration date, and it arrived today. She spoke calmly, explaining that adults who behave like strangers cannot expect the privileges of family. Her strength rattled them more than any threat. As the silence settled, she knew this was the moment she finally reclaimed her life. Later that evening, Marissa showed up at Eleanor's door with teary eyes and a trembling voice, rehearsing an apology that sounded polished rather than heartfelt. She talked about misunderstandings, pressure, and family unity, but never once mentioned her cruelty, manipulation, or the life agreement she had proudly pushed forward. Eleanor listened quietly, letting the words fall apart under their own emptiness. When Marissa finished, she simply said she could not accept an apology crafted for convenience rather than remorse. She reminded Marissa of the years she had spent taking advantage of her. Kindness, eroding the trust between them. Marissa's expression shifted from sorrow to frustration, proof the apology had never been real. Eleanor closed the door gently but firmly, choosing peace over pretense. Troy tried a different tactic. He emailed Eleanor demanding access to the trust, claiming he would go public with fabricated accusations if she refused. Instead of panicking, Eleanor forwarded the message to her lawyer, who responded with a cease and desist letter and an attached notice of legal action for extortion attempts. Within hours, Troy was calling her repeatedly, switching between rage and fear. Eleanor didn't pick up. She didn't need to. The law had spoken louder than she ever could. The next day, neighbors mentioned seeing Troy storming around town, embarrassed and desperate. It was the first time he realized that Eleanor wasn't the fragile widow he imagined. She was a woman finally done being intimidated, and now consequences had arrived at his doorstep. Shane was the only one who didn't fight. He packed a small bag, visited Eleanor with red eyes, and admitted everything: the pressure from his siblings, the resentment they'd carried for years, and the greed that blinded them. He confessed he never wanted to hurt her, but lacked the courage to stand against Marissa and Troy. His voice cracked when he told her their entire plan had backfired, leaving them fractured, angry, and ashamed. Eleanor listened with soft eyes, not forgiving yet, but understanding. His honesty was the first real sign of remorse she had seen in any of them. As he left, he told her he was moving out to rebuild his life without their influence. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Eleanor packed only what she needed and drove back to her ranch, the place where her memories breathed freely, untouched by betrayal. The quiet fields welcomed her like old friends. She walked through the land slowly, touching fences her husband once repaired, hearing echoes of laughter in the open wind. For the first time in months, the air felt clean. No demands, no manipulation, no signatures disguised as traps. She restored her routines, morning coffee on the porch, feeding the horses, tending the garden, and felt strength flowing back into her soul. The ranch had always been her sanctuary, but now it became her rebirth. The peace she reclaimed here was something her children could never take again. One morning, the mailman arrived with a small sealed envelope bearing her husband's handwriting. She froze, recognizing the familiar loops in his script. Inside was a letter he had written months before his death, one he asked his lawyer to send when she seemed lost. His words were gentle but firm, urging her to choose herself, to protect the ranch, to guard her heart from the greed he had sensed growing in their children. He reminded her that love doesn't mean surrendering your life to people who see you as a resource instead of a person. Eleanor read it twice, tears falling not from sadness but from validation. Even from beyond, he stood with her, guiding her toward freedom. Eleanor stood at the highest ridge of her ranch, the wind lifting her hair as she looked across the 630 acres she still owned, land no one could steal, claim, or trap her with. Her children's entitlement had finally collapsed, leaving her stronger than ever. She wasn't just free, she was untouchable. Every choice she made from now on would serve her peace, not their demands. She breathed in deeply, letting the sun warm her face, feeling the weight of years lift off her shoulders. Justice hadn't come through revenge, it came through boundaries, truth, and courage. And as she walked down the hill, she carried a new life with her, one built entirely on her terms.